Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture about the Szigeteket Ost, a period in Taimantal history where pirates basically ran an entire continent. So what are we going to discuss today is the history of Taimantal, specifically southern Taimantal, which in this period contains the two confederacy, Luarium, Fokan, and the Szigeteket Ost. So let's first meet the civilizations. So first, the Szigeteket Ost. They were founded as settlers from the northern Minkali, likely drifting down all the way to their island, where they founded a new civilization. Coming from the Minkali, which are a very naval civilization, they had a major head start in boating technology in the region. They basically used this to monopolize the seas for centuries, patrolling the coast and destroying any other navy and even ocean port they could find while raiding their major neighbors. The Szigeteket were not known for producing anything of worth themselves. They basically sustained themselves by raiding their neighbors and then trading with the further away Agantal. Then nearby was the Two Confederacy. They were an oligarchy led by 5 families. These 5 families were divided into realms. You had the hills, the plains, the rivers, the forest and the city. These 5 realms played a crucial part in Two culture and religion. Where you were born, where you worked, who you interacted with, it all depended on where you came from. Initially, the Two Confederacy was relatively loose, but in response to Szigeteket raiding, they integrated closer together to be able to better rebuff them. Then the final major civilization in this region were the Luarium. They were a theocracy with a rather interesting succession system. In good times, their leader would simply appoint their successor. But if they had failed to do so, the heir died before the master, or any other situation, they had an interesting way of choosing their successor. They would light the body of the former head of state on fire, and all the higher-up clergymen would try to get their hand as close as possible for as long as possible to the burning body. The person who lasted the longest would become the next head of state. This way, the new leader had proven their determination, which was considered crucial in times of crisis when this was likely to happen. Beyond this, the Luarium had a very rigid class system. You had the clergymen on top, you had the farmers, and you had silk producers. This silk was incredibly important and basically ran the entire Luarium economy. They had a monopoly on the product in early Taimantal. Luckily for them, this is also what saved them from the worst of Szigeteket raiding. Because they had the silk, they had struck a deal. In exchange for providing the Szigeteket with silk and not building any navy of their own, they would not be raided for other products. Through this, the Luarians managed to live relatively comfortably despite this period of major instability for the rest of the continent. So what was the Szigeteket hegemony? Well, starting from 2150 PH, the Szigeteket started dominating the seas. By this point, it was still relatively minor, but they were definitely the strongest power. By around 2100 PH though, their domination became full. Like I mentioned earlier, they had started systematically destroying any port that could pose a threat to their reign, as well as any navy, whether on a river or on the seas. No one in the Taimantal had a navy even close to challenging the Szigeteket. On the map, their hegemony basically looked something like this. The Luarium had been dominated relatively peacefully and turned into protectorates. Up north, the two were subjected to frequent raiding, leading to their civilization moving away from the coast and more inland. Then all the way up north here, we have the Yanqui, where we see that the most coastal city-states were frequent targets of Szigeteket raids, while the rest of the Confederacy basically gave up on them. Little aid came from the inland states to these coastal states, which led them to become quite impoverished over the course of the Szigeteket hegemony. The way the Szigeteket sustained their lifestyle was, like mentioned, by raiding all of their neighbors for as much as they can possibly get. The most lucrative of which was the Luarium silk, both because the preciousness of the material, but perhaps more importantly, because it was acquired without costly raids. Beyond that, the two were the ones hit the harshest by Szigeteket raids. Any products that the Szigeteket couldn't get by raiding their neighbors, they got by trading with the slightly further away Agantal. This way, the Szigeteket lifestyle, despite basically not producing anything of worth, wasn't just sustainable. Archaeological evidence has revealed that the Szigeteket apparently lived the most comfortable lives out of anyone in this era. Yet of course, this system would at some point come to an end. a tiny island cannot just dominate a continent forever. As time went on, the Szigeteket became decadent. They started to believe so much in their own superiority and the righteousness of their domination of their neighbors that they stopped their systematic destruction of ports and fleets. By this point, most raiding had also stopped, as most states just gave the Szigeteket whatever they needed to prevent costly raids and rebuilding. But because they stopped patrolling coast and they stopped destroying ports, a coalition effort could begin to bring down the Szigeteket. Luarium, the Yanqui, the Two, as well as some minor involvement from the states up north, would begin to wear down Szigeteket hegemony. Jointly, they began building a massive fleet, bigger than what even the Szigeteket could muster. The map of the core coalition looked something like this, with the Luarium, the Fokkan and the Two being major members, the coastal states of the Yanqui providing a lot as well, but even the more inland states of the Yanqui began to provide resources to build this navy with. As a result of this massive build-up, the coalition eventually managed to defeat the Szigeteket fleet and raided their mainland. Here we have the estimates of the Szigeteket naval size. At their peak, they had about 400 ships. Right before the coalition struck, they had about 350. After the war with the coalition was done, and the coalition was thorough, the Szigeteket are estimated to have fewer than 20 ships. Even worse for the Szigeteket though, about half of the population died in coalition raids on the island after the war. Understandably, the other nations in the Taimantal weren't quite forgiving to the Szigeteket. To make matters worse, the decline of the Szigeteket raid system and trade system with Agantal meant that soon after this coalition war, they were hit with a massive famine, further reducing their population. For about a century, the Szigeteket were now in limbo. They still existed and they were building up somewhat, but they were far from the great power they were before. That all changed though with Ekwon the Lavarian. After the coalition war, the Szigeteket had basically turned into a region of warlords. One warlord that finally was successful at permanently reuniting the island was this Ekwon. He originated from Lavarian, traveled to the Szigeteket and managed to reunite the region. This was really lucky for Lavarian, because by this time, the Nikun Ruplak had launched a major nomadic invasion of Luvarium. It looked like the very state was going to be destroyed. But under Edwin, the Szigeteket would get involved in this conflict. But while Ekwon wanted to get involved for free, his advisors forced him to demand a bunch of stuff from Lavarium in exchange for his aid. Most importantly, the Szigeteket got a port on the mainland, as well as a yearly tribute in silk coming from Lavarium. This way, slowly but steadily, Szigeteket wealth started to rebound. After this, the Szigeteket conquered the Fokkan, who were invading Luvarium from behind, after which the true conflict could begin. This war, which we in the modern day now know as the sack of Luvan, would be crucial for the balance of power in the region. By the time the Szigeteket got seriously involved, the Nikun had already pushed all the way to the capital of the Luvarium. From here, the coalition managed to push them back, with the Szigeteket landing on their eastern coast. Eventually, even the Two got involved, and the Nikun were completely destroyed. These are the borders of the southern Taimantal by the end of this conflict. As you can see, the Szigeteket now control Fokkan, they control a major port in Luvarium, and they've even seized a major part of the coastline of Taimantal. But while Luvarium managed to not get destroyed and even expanded a bit, this was by all accounts a Pyrrhic victory for Luvarium. They bore the brunt of the war, and most of their major eastern cities had been razed to the ground. While they had survived, they had only done so by accepting humiliating demands placed on them by the Szigeteket. The humiliating tribute placed on them in silk was costly, but the port very close to their capital was even more humiliating. Basically, Luvarium had returned to their previous position as a tributary of the Szigeteket. With that, this is how we leave Taimantal after this first episode. Next episode, we will dive into the northern Taimantal, discussing the Firulin, the Minkali, the Yinsui, the Yanqui, and the Two Confederacy as well. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, consider leaving a like, a comment, and subscribing for more. If you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy one of the two coming on screen now. Again, thank you all for watching, I hope to see you next time. and goodbye.